This is Mamta Patania. Welcome to the session on RTI, Transparency and Accountability in Administration. This session primarily talks about the importance of transparency and accountability with special reference to RTI in administration. We all know governance is defined as manner in which power is exercised in the management of a country's economic and social resources. There are three distinct aspects of governance: the forms of political regime, the process by which authority is exercised, and the capacity of government to design, formulate and implement policies and discharge functions. And while we talk about good governance, it implies service to the people. Good governance connotes that the institutions of governance are run for the optimal benefit of the stakeholders. The measure of good governance is to what extent the government is able to improve the quality of life of the people. There are n number of characteristics of good governance: consensus-oriented, responsive, equitable and inclusive, effective and efficient, rule of law, people's participation, accountability and transparency. Now these all connote the basic characteristics of good governance, and the basic aim is proper service delivery. For proper service delivery and to improve service delivery, good governance is one thing which is very, very important. Now, what does good governance connote? It basically improves the process. Once the processes are improved, the quality improvement is but obvious, which is basically focusing on three important parameters, that is, number one, citizen satisfaction, stakeholder satisfaction and employee satisfaction. While we talk about the characteristics, we should also be telling and knowing that what are the criteria for measuring good governance. There are basically 4 to 5 criteria for measuring good governance. Number one, effectiveness. Now when we talk about effectiveness, it tells effectiveness about achievement of goals. Number two, efficiency, that is output-input ratio. Number three, adequacy, that is satisfaction of the coverage of a particular setup. Number four, equity, which tells that fair or just procedures are adopted in an organization. And last, responsiveness, that basically connotes the satisfaction level of the people for whom the complete good governance process is working. In the process, performance management requirements are very, very must. For this, develop meaningful measurable expectations. Recruitment has to be based upon skill, knowledge and job competencies. Providing regular, frequent performance feedback, rewards and recognitions to the employees, preparing timely, constructive EPRs and identifying and providing training are few of the requirements which is must for performance management. We all know accountability and transparency are two crucial aspects of governmental oversight that ensure ethical engagements. Both of these characteristics are included in the top core values that describe the personality of a person or of an organization. Accountability and transparency practices have been put in place in most governmental agencies and are expected to be upheld. But there remains a shadowed area where these implications fail to be maintained. Accountability is the aspect of administrative responsibility through which officials are held answerable for general notions of democracy and morality, as well as for the specific legal mandates. We all know there are different mechanisms of accountability. To name a few: elections, legislative scrutiny, courts, auditors and other monitoring agencies, intra-organizational accountability, public access to government information, and the list is long. Accountability and transparency leads to good governance. We all know good governance provides a platform that enables the government to operate efficiently, effectively and transparently, and to be accountable to the public. Primary principles of good governance include public participation in the government, respect for the rule of law, freedom of expression and association, and transparency and accountability. Now, there are two aspects: responsibility and accountability, and to know the difference between the two. While in responsibility, being responsible always has other persons in mind, The focus of meaning is upon the individual's effort, duty and obligations, whereas accountability always assumes a prior responsibility, for we always lay out what we expect before we can lay out what the consequences will be for failure to meet the expectations. In responsibility, we call someone responsible when we judge the person's motives, intentions and carefulness with respect to the task. While in accountability, it refers to how the individual will be judged and thus either rewarded or punished. Responsibility tells, I'll do it, whereas accountability says, I'll pay a price if I don't do it right. A sense of obligation, commitment is there in responsibility, while in accountability, accepting person's liability for one's actions, accepting one's actions and the consequences thereafter. For transparency and accountability in administrative setups, good flow of information is very important. Now, what are the preconditions for the good flow of information? For this, in a good governance structure, culture of transparency and openness has to be there. Awareness about the rules and regulations per se. Access to the information is very, very important. Accountability for lack of openness and participation of all the employees in the processes is a prerequisite for a good flow of information. What are the factors which hamper flow of information? Culture of secrecy and corruption is the first and the foremost thing which hampers flow of information. Repression of information, ignorance about the rules and the regulations, and fear of participation and taking action is one of the most important thing which hampers the flow of information. For this flow of information, collecting and dissemination of information is very, very important. Now, what does RTI help understand? It helps us to know the current workflow, what are the citizen requirements, what are the different records and documents, the database management, problems to be solved, and above all, the public authority. There are various principles of RTI. To name the first principle, that is maximum disclosure. It tells all information held by a public authority is subject to disclosure. Exemptions apply only in very limited circumstances. Exercising the right to access information should not require undue effort. Responsibility should be on the public authority to justify any denials. Number 2, obligation to publish. Freedom of information requires public authorities to do more than accede to request for informations. Public authorities must publish and disseminate categories of information of significant public interest. Number 3, promotion of open government. Right to Information Act should promote culture of openness within the government. It should make provisions for public education and dissemination of information, outline the manner in which the right can be exercised. Principle number 4, limited scope of exemption. The information must relate to the legitimate aim of the Act. Disclosure must threaten substantial harm to that aim. The harm must be greater than the public interest in disclosure. Principle 5, process to facilitate information. All requests for information should be processed quickly and fairly by individuals within the public authorities. In case of denial, a procedure for appeal to an independent administrative body should be established. Principle 6 is costs. The cost of access to information should never be so high as to deter request. Public interest requests should be subject to lower fees than commercial requests. Principle 7, open records. All records of the public authorities should be open to the public so that the public is aware of what the authorities are doing and is able to participate on decision making. The records should be well maintained and accessible in time. Principle number 8, disclosure takes precedence. Other legislations should be interpreted in a manner that renders it consistent with the disclosure requirements of RTI Act. In case of conflict between the RTI Act and the secrecy law, the former should prevail. And Principle 9, protection to whistleblowers. Protection should be provided to individuals from legal, administrative or employment related sanctions for releasing information on wrongdoing. Now, who is qualified to be a PIO? The person qualified to be PIO should have a domain knowledge of the subject. He should be careful and responsible, He should be active. He should have information related to that very particular subject and easy to communicate and sensitive to citizens' needs. For organizations, it is very important to identify the type of information you hold. Identifying the information that is likely to be most interest and make specific plans to prepare that information. Identify the risk your information may pose and how to manage these risks. How can your organization receive requests? Who will decide that the information sought is not barred by the provisions of the Act? How many requests can be handled per day? And do you require additional resources or not? Are some of the things which require to be taken care of. Now there is a very specific to-do list as far as role of government is concerned. First of all, formulate an action plan, that is with specific timeline for implementation. Identify public authorities in all departments, that is from secretariat to the field level. Identify public authorities in other bodies, that is constituted, established, owned, controlled or substantially financed directly or indirectly. Designate PIOs, APIOs and DAAs in every public authority. Constitute the Information Commission, that is appoint CIC, SCIC and ICs and provide funds and staff. Compile Public Information Directory or a handbook for every public authority. Section 4, that is proactive disclosures. Notify the rules, that is stipulate application fees, stipulate rates for calculating additional fees, determine mode and cost of dissemination of Public Information Directory or handbook, determine procedures for IC to decide on appeals. Open budget heads, that is for monies received and spent under RTI Act, that particular thing has to be kept in mind. Prescribed formats and registers for applications, receipts, fees, intimations, rejection orders and appeals. Notify exempt organizations, that is intelligence and security agencies under section 24(4) and lay down procedures for inspection and for collecting of samples. Lastly, develop basic practice manuals for APIs, PIOs and DAAs. Lay down procedures for deciding partial access under section 10 and 11. Develop basic guidelines for interpreting exemptions and public interest under section 8. Undertake sensitization and training programs, which is very important for APIOs, PIOs, DAAs and IC staff first, later on for other officials. Develop a user guide for the benefit of citizens in the official language within 18 months. Undertake programs for public education for citizens with particular attention to the disadvantaged communities. So friends, with this is a specific to-do list for the government and for the organizations to follow. But role of accountability and transparency is very, very important as far as administration is concerned. Thank you so much.